Hi, my name's Azzah, and my friend Darlene Mansell. I'm interviewing an amazing woman. You've got to know about her. What does women's wisdom have to teach the world, and specifically Australian Aboriginal women's wisdom? We're in Tasmania, by the way.
Well, I think personally, if we were to ignore any aspect of womanhood, we're not going to advance or progress anywhere in the world as a society of human beings. So, and Indigenous women, because we have such intrinsic cultural practices and knowledge, which, you know, as I keep on reminding everybody, Australian Aboriginality is 40,000 to 60,000 years old. And again, to draw on the analogy of Nita Roddick, if we are to undervalue or dismiss Indigenous cultural beliefs, value systems, it's like, and our stories, of course, it's simply like burning down libraries. And so I think,
like they did with the witches in the Western world, they burnt down the libraries.
Exactly.
All of that wisdom that those women had because they were healers, which means crafting wisdom. Absolutely, yeah.
And I think for the continuation of a valued society, I think women, and particularly Indigenous women, can share with other women around the world, and of course in terms of dealing with men, about your value system, about children, about community. I mean, as we know, it's women who birth, who look after children, who keep the world going. And that is somehow undervalued in today's society. I think, you know, we are a global village, and I think it's important that we keep sharing as women all across the world. We've got to maintain the ability to share and to value Indigenous knowledge.
What about in your culture, you know, hundreds of years ago, whenever, what was women's roles? Were women valued? Was women's wisdom valued then?
Well, I have a belief that I think it had much more value than what it does today, Azzah, because I think that's how we nurtured, we sustained Mother Earth, we continued having our children, generations, passing down stories. I mean, I guess for me as an Aboriginal woman from Australia, there's one really important aspect which the rest of the world doesn't hear about, and that is Australia is a very racist country. Now, a lot of people don't like to hear that, or would dismiss my opinion and confront me about that. But the reality is,
based on fact, or, you know, what physically happened.
Well, that's right. I mean, even in modern day Australia now, Aboriginal people in this country are treated as second-rate citizens. It's not uncommon, and it goes unknown that Aboriginal people, day by day as I speak to you, are being abused, exploited, you know, bullied, and I think there's this almost naivety that the rest of the world has about Australia, and they don't really have an understanding that we do house the oldest living Indigenous human culture in the world. And I think that Australia still hasn't come to terms with that, and it's really quite sad, because what we're doing is a disservice to our young people to tell them the truth about history. We've got to know the past.
Absolutely.
To know where we are now, where we're going. And, you know, I understand there are a lot of casualties of history who don't know where they come from, and are really craving to find out that journey. That's what life's about. But I think that there's a great misunderstanding about the lucky country, Australia, that we haven't got a lot of things right in this country, and we need a big shift and a big change. And, you know, I still feel that's going to happen. I mean, I'd like to think, you know, being labelled a difficult woman all my life, basically.
Good on you.
Yes, I'm proud of that, actually. Is that some of the activism I have done has actually helped create change.
Absolutely. Difficult woman actually means going against the social norm, which is suppression, oppression, castration from your tribe, from yourself as a human being, right? That's what difficult woman means.
And I think, well, I take it as a compliment. So I'm certainly not offended. I don't mind, you know, being labelled. We're all labelled, but I think that's a you know, a truth label for me. I mean, I think as I was growing up as a young woman, and when I became sort of involved with pure activism in terms of standing up politically as an Aboriginal woman, as a black person in this country, I think one of the characteristics that I hold, or is part of my human nature as an individual woman, is that I don't have a fear policy. I'm sort of grew up always feeling quite shrouded or clouded that, you know, you can't do this or you can't do that. But, you know, it's been important for me. It's that true thing about where I draw my faith from. Some of my confrontationalist activism, if I could call it that, in the 70s and the 80s, that's come about because of this little, I guess, stream of my personality, which is, okay, no fear policy. Really, at the end of the day, unless through sort of a health situation, I mean, the only thing that could really kill me or shut me up would be a gun. But I just believe that we need to I think we fear ourselves more.
Yeah.
And the ability of what we have and what we can achieve as individual
That's
women.
successful colonisation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Where you become scared of your own power
Wow.
and your own voice and your own truth. Great colonisation. Give me an example of some noise that you made that changed things.
Oh, I think about this quite often. Well, not quite often, but when I'm sitting down reflecting, I think as a local woman who's from Tasmania, and the identity crisis that we were put through, the denial of who we are, of our cultural beliefs and practices. Quite a few years ago in this country, in the 70s, there was a very, very big campaign, and it's still active because it's still happening, and it was called the Aboriginal Deaths in Custody campaign, because basically Aboriginal incarceration numbers and rates are higher than anywhere in the world. So per population, Aboriginal people
Wow.
in this country were being put in police and prison custody, and they were fatal outcomes. And to this day, there are situations where still prison or police have not been brought to justice for killing Aboriginal people.
Yeah.
So we had a Royal Commission in Australia to review the legalities of how Aboriginal people were treated in police and prison custody. Now, that Royal Commission found that as a bare minimum, for police and prison, Aboriginal people are not to be placed in police or prison protection or custody for minor offences.
Yeah.
Now, I live about an hour's drive from Launceston City, so I live in the country, and I was coming into Launceston, and I got into Launceston this morning and found out that 2 Aboriginal men from our community, who really were alcoholics with no violent intent whatsoever, they were simply having a drink in a public place, in a square which is locally accepted and known. Well, these 2 Aboriginal men were picked up and placed in prison custody, and it seemed to me that we just had the handing down of the recommendations of the Royal Commission, and the local police force I thought it was a challenge. They were bringing it on to say, well, we're not going to conform as Tasmanian police force, so we're still just going to do what we've continued to do. And I met up with a few of my mob, as we call each other, the community, and we're at our local Aboriginal organisation, and I said, hey, if we don't stand up to this, we've really got to make a stand in our local community here. So the long and short, we had a brainstorm, and we thought we would march the main streets of Launceston and go down to Central City where we have a big mall, and we made an effigy of a policeman, and we actually put a pig's face, because that's a reference to a cop. And we released a lot of media, national, we went international, because we wanted to shame Australia that they weren't committed to practicing what they preached. And so as a local woman in a small town of about 60,000 people, pretty conservative town, we marched the streets. I led the march and we went to the central mall in town. It was very, very busy. All the police were waiting on the outskirts of the town. They knew they couldn't come to arrest us because we hadn't broken any law, so to speak. And they knew, because we had released the media nationally and internationally, if they were to come in, it would just generate, an ugly situation that they weren't doing what they were supposed to do. So we actually, it wasn't premeditated, but it was just the spontaneity of the situation. In the protest action, we lit the effigy. So that was pretty confronting for little old conservative Launceston. All of a sudden, a group of 20 Aboriginal people are marching the streets at peak hour lunchtime, and this difficult woman, being me, leading, and is saying, we're not going to take this anymore, and we need to make a point. So we went to the central mall, and then I had a local member, a bureaucrat from the local council, come to attempt to tell me I was breaking a bylaw. I said, I do not care about the bylaw. We've got bigger issues going on. Well, it was pretty confrontationalist for Tasmania and for Launceston. And, some people may think, well, that's a silly story, or that was a stupid thing to do. But for the time and what we needed to do, I thought it was very appropriate. And then from doing that, after we burnt the police effigy, we got what was left of that, and about 30 of us marched around to the local police station in Launceston, and we did a sit-in until they released those two Aboriginal men.
Wow.
Then within an hour, they had to release them because it just went national and it embarrassed them. So I was really quite pleased with that little bit of action.
Yeah.
And I think there's a better situation, dare I say, it's a better situation in Launceston now with the relationship with police. There's a little bit more negotiation that goes on. They know we have our people who go to the park and drink. All they want to do is have a drink and be happy. They don't want to get aggressive. So it's not it's not such a difficult relationship. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think there's been change in attitude from, the likes of the police system.
That they can just do anything they want.
Exert their power anytime. So, I'd like to think that actions like that, which I was part of, and other people, they've helped over the years just create a shift in attitude in this state.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, obviously.
There's a place for that confrontational activism.
Yeah.
And dare I say, most of the protests that I've been involved in on that level, when I think about it, it's been the woman's energy that's the driving force behind this protest action. I mean, the boys or the brother boys or the men may come and join us, but I'll tell you now very clearly, it's that woman's spirit that is the driving force, that has the no fear, because of how we've got to live continuously. And we are a very strong Aboriginal community in Tasmania. We're certainly misunderstood even by the rest of mainland Australia. But we have a reputation, we have a history in Tasmania of being quite politically strong and part of the national movement. I mean, things have shifted in this country, but for example, in 1988, it was a bicentennial year in Australia. So it was Australia celebrating its heritage, its birthday, colonial birthday.
200 years,
200 years, that's right, of working together. And so we did a very big national Aboriginal protest in this country, where Aboriginal people from all around the country were driving, walking, hitchhiking, any which way to meet in Sydney, where they were doing a reenactment of the British ships coming in to save us. And I think there was in excess of 20,000 Aboriginal people that marched, that got together as the white people in the country were celebrating the colonial history. And I think that was so bold. I think it was important for the world to see that, because you see protest images and actions from around the world.
Yeah.
But in terms of Aboriginal people in Australia, you might see a little slice of a protest here or a little peak there. But that was an amazing energy. And Australia had to, in front of the world, realise that they weren't going to get off the hook, that white Australia does have a black history.
Yeah.
They've got to deal with it.
Yeah. What a shame. How small, you know. I mean, there's this amazing ancientness, you know, and to cut all of that off and think it's meaningless. It's incredible.
Oh, it is, and the astounding thing, I mean, there's been a shift, but there has to be a bigger shift. I think we're still doing a disservice to all our young people in this country. For example, on the education level, there still not is enough truth, whether it's academic or whether it's shared culturally or one-on-one. But I think we are doing a disservice to our young people in this country by not acknowledging Aboriginal history in its truest form, and that it still exists. And it's not something back there. We live with it, be proud of it. It is being part of being Australian.
And it does still exist, doesn't it?
Yeah,
totally.
I'm fortunate to say, I mean, there's been a big shift. We've had some changes. We're getting sort of more access to Indigenous people, Indigenous stories. Schools and the education system are opening up to it more. But again, you know, a lot of Australian history is based on a lie. Captain Cook did not discover Australia. The rest of the world need to know that. And he's not the forefather of Australia. He invaded. He came here because he could not see a fence, black people harvesting of the land, terra nullius, no one lives here, we'll put the flag in, this now belongs to us. And, you know, it's that's a cultural aspect of Australian life, that is still a big part of Australia, still believe that and still have that attitude and carry that attitude. So it's really quite hard work living in Australia as Aboriginal people, because you've sort of got to constantly convince, tell your story, and to try and get through. But I guess as a mum now of two young men, it's so important to involve the young people and make that link connection with that elder wisdom. You know.
So, just generally, how are Australian Aboriginal people seen by white people here?
Still a problem to a big degree. I mean, there is a big shift. There's a push under the banner of reconciliation in this country, that we need to heal the wounds of history. There's been some attempts of that of recent times, but I still think the country has a big shift to make. And I think that we can't wait forever. We've really got to be a bit more mature about this and get on with it. You know, we've passed the 200th birthday. The Gammon birthday. But
the invasion birthday.
That's exactly right. So there's been a shift. For me, it needs to go a little bit quicker. I just think that we need to really connect the younger generation of Australians with this ancient wisdom, and particularly with ancient women's Indigenous history in this country. And there are so many women around every corner of this country that work towards that, as there are women all around the rest. I've gone to a range of gatherings of Indigenous and Aboriginal peoples from around the world, whether it's been here or a couple of other places. But I guess there is such a misunderstanding about our ancient history, which is linked to who we are now. But we have Indigenous men and women, elders who live on the Big Island, and they know stories from thousands of years ago, and will sing stories and tell stories about the stars, the universe, the trees, the earth, the wind, the animals. And, you know, to ignore these as part of Australian culture is to devalue and do such a disservice to all of us.
All of us.
And the world too needs
to know. The world. Because that's like human heritage, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's human. We have to know about ourselves. The way to be colonised is not know who you are, right?
Absolutely.
And that wisdom, thousands of years old wisdom, is so important. Oh my God.
So there's certainly challenges that we face in this country. It certainly can be seen as hard work. We constantly have to, live with that situation of the denial of our existence, our rights that are attached to that as cultural peoples of the world. But I think I've noticed a change that from when looking at non-Aboriginal people in this country, there has been a greater shift of understanding. I will say that. Because I think, maybe within the next 5 years, Australia as a nation is dealing with a new issue of its identity, and our national government at the moment is involved, its early stages, but there have been Aboriginal people involved in discussions, and this will be ongoing, about a Bill of Rights for Australia. And in that, in talking about the identity of this country, the Aboriginal people involved obviously are committed to making sure that the preamble of that Bill of Rights acknowledges Indigenous peoples and rights and history in this country. So, I'm hoping in time to come, whether I live through it or not, we will become a republic. We will become detached from the empire. Mm-hmm. I think that's important for our growth as a nation, and in that, I'm really hoping that, for all the years of hard work that all my ancestors have done relative up to some of the work I have done and the work that's yet to be done, I think we can all feel proud and satisfied that we've helped create that change.
Right.
So, and I think that's important for Australia's future.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that you're going to, the rest of the world may get a greater understanding of what Australia really is, who its people are.
Yeah.
That attitude, that male, misogynistic attitude that obviously wants to just keep women in their place.
Yeah.
And I think
it has to come to an end, doesn't it?
That's the
life is screaming for that. Yeah. Level of consciousness to come to an end. Mother Earth is screaming for that, the end of that.
So I think that's got to be a big shift in our politics. I mean, when you look at politics generally in Australia now, we have a lot more women. We are now getting to the point very soon, our first Indigenous woman in national politics. I think that's going to be a pathway for other Indigenous women. I mean, who knows? In terms of a prediction, we could have an Aboriginal party, political party that may, similar to the Green movement around the world, may take on its representation of it. I don't know, but I'd like to think that would be a good thing.
Yeah, is there anything happening for that to manifest?
Well, I mean, we're such a small percentage of the population in Australia, but because we're attached to the oldest living, practicing culture in the world, I think it's significant that we ought to be part of a new Australia on that level. But, there's been a few attempts by different Aboriginal individuals or groups of Aboriginal people to be involved at that political level. And I think that will go on, but...
that's fantastic.
Whether it will be representative in that political sphere of, having your socialist parties, whatever. But I think that we're slowly getting there, and I think, the fact, whether people like her or not, the Prime Minister of Australia being a woman, the first female Prime Minister, and I think, the amount of women now, as I said, getting recognised, being involved, making important decisions.
Why is it that it's the women that have held the substance of your culture?
Well, we're the nurturers. We're Mother Earth. Earth is our mother. We are of the same. And that may sound dreamy or whatever or romantic to people, but it's that woman spirit that's universal, that comes from Mother Earth, and You know, I think we've been blessed. We are the creatures, we are the goddesses. You know, I don't think men have the ability to do that, to be quite frank. And the world is pretty messy now because they've had too much power. But, you know, I think it'd be crazy to think about the dysfunctional life that we would lead if, you know, it had been left up to the man, because I just really
Well, that's already the way it is, isn't it?
I don't think men are capable of the nurturing aspect of maintaining that
life, nurturing of life.
Nurturing of life. And, you know, it does rest with us. And it is part of who we are.
Yeah.
And the earlier you get to understand that as a woman, I think it will be easier the path we tread. You know, I take it on, I love it, I'm serious about it, yes. And I really don't think men get it, you know, and that's really got to change. You know, that's really got to change.
Yeah. In every culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
In every culture, that has to change. Absolutely. Yeah. Obviously, because global warming and everything else that's going on, the pollution of the oceans and all of that, yes, it has to change. And it is up to women, yeah. Tell me one story of a teaching.
Well, I guess like possibly corroborees. I mean, we have them down here, our old people have them, but ochre is very significant to Aboriginal women. And
what's that?
Ochre is of the earth. It's like silk. It's like, well, I think it's like silk. It's earth. It's colour. We have different ochres. We have beautiful red ochre. We have yellow, white, black. Ochre was a very significant part of my ancestors from Tasmania too. We have very special sacred areas on this island where we can go and collect ochre. And in fact, it was women in our community on this island that when our mob would get together for a big corroboree over a period of days where they'd have a fire, they'd sing.
Corroboree means celebration.
Yes, celebration coming together. So our old people, my old people, prior to colonisation, would gather together in a special place, a sacred place that had meaning. And the women would go and collect the ochre. So they would go off together as a group of women, collect this ochre, and it had its spiritual significance for your unification to your spirit world, your dream world. And so the women would then collect the ochre, bring it back down, and there'd be a process of decoration, of painting one's body. Pardon me. And then different coloured ochres represented different stories. And it was just beautiful, some of the images I'm aware of that exist of our people. Excuse me. And so we would have our corroborees over a period of 4 days, 3 nights, where the children, the men, the women would dance, share stories. And we would sing to Mother Earth or do ritual performances to call on the Great Spirit God to seek advice from the dream world. And that is relevant to us as much as it is to mainland Australia. And there is a myth that we in Tasmania are disconnected from that. But us women down here, our ochre is significant. It gives us strength. If I wear ochre, I'm in a really comfortable place. I can feel that I have this extra strength, and that is just so deep and ancient. I'm thinking, wow, you know, 7 generations ago, my old women were doing similar things, Darlene, and this ochre, and it just gives you that power and that strength, and it's the symbolism. So that's important to us.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And dream time is the connection to the spirit world to get guidance.
To seek guidance.
Do you know that Carl Jung was very big on that, you know? In dream time is where the truth of your soul was exposed to you, you know, and it was guidance from the spirit world, from your spirit and from greater spirits.
Well, that's true, and I have a firm belief, and nobody will change my mind, even other Aboriginal members of my community. But the pathway, the journey I travelled, the people I've been connected to, the stories, the relationship I formed with myself, the land, going back out to the mountains, giving birth to my son, a whole range of experiences. Our people, the mountains on this island were very significant, like most mountains are, I guess, if you really do research around the world, landmarks. And so in relation to our dreaming stories in Tasmania, our old people, if they wanted to talk to our great ancestral spirit called Moini, they would have to walk up to a mountain, and they would spend something maybe like 7 days. And they would live on top of the mountain, and they would use different ceremonial practices to draw to Moini for the great spirit, ancestral spirit. And if there was an issue going on, for example, if they were saying, you know, we're losing a lot of our animals, there's been, you know, a lot of them have been killed, or something is happening, or is there sickness going on the land that is poisoning our animals, what do we do, Great Spirit? That process is how it would have happened. They would have walked to the top of the mountain. They would have had representatives from the different clans or tribes. And then those nominated people, senior people who do the communication, would go to the top of the mountain, and they would do very sacred ritual. And then they would enter a sphere of dreaming into the dreaming world, dream time. And so that's relevant to us here
Oh
in
my
Tasmania
God, yeah.
as much. And so as an Aboriginal woman, for me, I've gone to country, and I've done that so I can reconnect. I've climbed to the top of what I believe is just a magical, very special mountain. And I think it's through that heart intelligence that's my connection to understand it. And I've placed myself to think and to feel and to how, and it can happen, and it will.
Oh my God.
And so I think there's such a wealth of knowledge and a beauty of culture that we have in Tasmania that not many people, even local Tasmanians, would know about. And the rest of Australia wouldn't know about. I mean, I guess for the rest of the world, they see these images of dark-skinned people with little red laps and headbands and paints and dancing in the dust and the dirt. And they think that all Aboriginal people in this country are like that. Not true. Certainly that is a big aspect for desert people, for other people, but different people use colours because they represent or symbolise different aspects of what they're seeking or their story. So
that's beautiful.
It's just not relevant to everybody. We just, you know, we have variations. And our dream time down here, you know, our creation stories, they can tell us about how the stars were created. We have this knowledge. It's been a long time coming. It's out there. But because colonisation wanted to keep on taking from us. And at one point in my life as a young woman, a young Aboriginal woman, I do remember, I'd get quite sad, Azzah, because I think, gee, darling, everything's been taken from you. You know, not so much your identity, but you've had so much taken from you. How can you feel a whole Indigenous woman? Then I clicked to it that it is out there.
Yes.
I just have to connect with it, darling. So once I made that connection, I've just travelled a different journey, and it's just given me an inner strength that is with me now.
You really good
I've got the cough up. That's true.
That's fantastic. That is
true.
so important.
That's what I've done. That's why I went and had him under the mountain and had my baby. I went and tried those things. I went and sat on the mountain and went and drew and talk, you know. You've got to, you know, you've got to have a go at it. Otherwise you won't know. It's that fear that you have inside yourself, or
fear of yourself, fear of your own power, and not knowing how to connect with Great Spirit.
That's it. You just have to take your time. You just have to find that space in a day, in a week, in a life, in a moment, and you can do it. And you know, I truly believe we just have so many significant places on this island that the truth that, you know, those beautiful cultural stories should come out instead of just looking at all the negative or sort of saying, no, it didn't really happen down here, and the real Aborigines live in the Northern Territory and all that, and being undervaluing us down here. It's just doing a disservice to everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, I'm comfortable with what I believe in.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that's so important for humanity to connect with their own spirit and with great spirit, whatever that is, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Some people call it God, some people call it love, whatever great spirit is for you, to connect, to have that connection. Because if you don't, you are lost.
And
you are lost.
From what my experience is, it's a warmth, it's a sensation, it's a feeling, that it's an emotion that you just can't get anywhere else.
Yeah.
And it just, you know, it's that faith, I mean, it's that higher being of love, of power, of, you know, and connecting with it, you know, makes you a better person, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It makes you, doesn't it?
Yeah, well,
it makes you really you.
Yeah.
Instead of some carbon copy of yourself.
Exactly right. So then you can be the best person that you can be. And, you know, that's what sort of guided me, I guess. You know, sometimes I've got it wrong and we all trip up. But at the end of the day, I won't stop being who I am, my nature, my character, my heart intelligence, my articulation. You know, I'm happy to debate with anybody, but at the end of the day, that's just about words. It's not about feeling. And heart intelligence is the highest level of intelligence that we can have and we can share.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and that's actually, don't be frightened about that or scared. That's pretty easy because it's sharing the feeling of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about who can articulate the longest word or the Latin meaning of this word. It's nothing to do with that. It's actually quite a very easy process if we allow ourselves to go there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Isn't that the most important thing in the world? Isn't that incredible? Women's wisdom, Australian Aboriginal women's wisdom. So important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow.
Beautiful.